Hello to my Theories of Personality students. I hope you're all doing well. I decided to go with a different look today, trying to pretend I'm a professor. So I've got the shirt and tie on. Of course, what you can't see is my fishnet stockings and the red tutu that I'm wearing, maybe later this semester. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well. And you probably got an email from me earlier telling you that rlinden@sussex.edu is working. So from this point on, if you need to reach me by email, go with that college email address. And I don't think I've heard from anybody regarding clarifications on the midterm that's due this coming Wednesday, April the 8th. So still got some time, but let me just say to you that if you do have any questions, please reach out to me. And then the other thing that I want to start doing this week is I want to try to hear a little bit more from you. So it doesn't mean I'm going to do Zoom, but when you watch one of the YouTube uploads from this class, I would like to ask you to make comments. The comment could simply be that it was wonderful. Now, the comment could simply be that you watched it, but it would also be a place where you could ask questions and just make comments about the material, things that you might observe about a particular theory that makes sense to you in some way or doesn't make sense to you in some way. But please start giving me some more feedback. I can kind of see the number of views that it's gotten, and I can go to the analytics on YouTube and look at how long people have been watching, which is pretty grim. But I really would like to hear more from you. So use the comments as a way to reach out to me, please. I think you've probably all heard by now that this is the format that we're going to be in for the rest of the semester. Every day is an experiment. And as time goes on, I hope to refine this a little bit more, but I think it's working so far. Doing this, as you know, for all of my 6 psych classes that I'm teaching this semester. So again, the YouTube link is rlinden4, rlinden the number 4, and that'll take you to this. So today is going to be part 1 of B.F. Skinner's theory of personality. Last lecture, we finished our coverage of Erikson, and today we're going to start looking at Skinner. And so mostly what I want to do today is just kind of set the stage for understanding his theory. And I'm starting to feel, just in my own reckoning, that instead of doing one lecture for 65, 70 minutes, it's kind of better maybe if I break it down into 2 shorter lectures. So this is going to be, let's call this part 1. And you've all heard the name Skinner, right? B.F. Skinner. He was a Harvard psychologist. He taught in the graduate school at Harvard University. And you've all heard the name Skinner either from just kind of pop culture or from Intro to Psych. Skinner was one of the first psychologists to study a type of learning called operant conditioning. And operant conditioning is based on the rules of reinforcement and punishment and how reward and punishment can be used to modify or shape an animal's behavior, including you and me, the human animal. But before we can get into Skinner's theory, I want to talk a little bit about behaviorism. Every theory we've covered up to this point, Freud, Jung, Adler, and Erikson, really are theories, especially the first 3, that come out of Europe. They're grounded in an exploration of all of the factors that are privately going on, hidden inside an individual's mind that shapes his or her personality. But in the early to mid 20th century, a different way of understanding behavior began to develop. And this is not a new idea. One way to think about how this works is Earlier psychologists put out a particular worldview, a particular set of theories based on certain ideas, and then other people come along in opposition and they do something very different. They kind of go off in different directions. The rise of behaviorism, of which Skinner was a part, was a fundamental shift away from psychoanalysis and psychodynamic theories of personality. And so older ideas kind of spawn newer ideas. And we're going to see this again down the road when we look at how the development of humanistic psychology, the theories of Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, were really emerged out of a rebellion against both psychoanalytic theories and also behavioral theories. But we're not at that point yet. So there are many pieces to the world of behaviorism, and behaviorism is actually a school of psychology. It's a very broad sort of meta set of ideas that attempt to understand animal behavior. And you notice how I keep saying animal behavior. A lot of behavioral theories emerged not by studying humans, but by studying laboratory rats, laboratory pigeons, primates, and so on. And what Skinner did that's kind of interesting is Skinner was, to start off, a research psychologist. He was a scientist, and he used the scientific methods to study behavior in simpler animals, especially lab rats and lab pigeons. Later in Skinner's career, he took his findings about explaining behavior by studying simpler animals and began then to apply those to understanding you and me and building a theory of personality. So Skinner's original work was not really to build a theory of personality. It was to understand how reinforcement and punishment can alter experimentally in scientific research the behavior of an animal. Now, behaviorism was not founded by Skinner. He's one of the most important names, but he was not the first one. There were other people before him, his predecessors, and they were names like Ivan Pavlov, Pavlov, and you've all heard of the name Pavlov, Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov was a Russian physiologist. He wasn't a psychologist. He was a physiologist about a century ago in Russia who studied a very, very simple type of learning found in all animals, obviously including you and me, called classical conditioning. Pavlov's research in the early 20th century on this very simple type of learning, the bell, salivation, dogs, right, led later on to the emergence of behaviorism. There are a couple of other names that are important in understanding the history of behaviorism. Another one was Thorndike, Thorndike, and it just occurs to me that I need to email you the review sheet that I'm working from on Skinner. I may have to retype it. It's a bit of a mess, but I will do that. Thorndike's work, looking at reward and punishment in animals, was also a major contributor to the development of Skinner's theories. And then the third one was Watson, Watson. Watson was one of the early founders of behaviorism, who basically argued, as did the British empiricists, philosophers going back centuries, that if you have complete control over a child's behavior in terms of reward and punishment and the building of habits, you can basically turn that child into anything you want that child to be. So behaviorism really starts off with that old issue of nature versus, or nature plus nurture, right? Nature is what we're born with genetically. Nurture is what we learn as we move through our lives, how different environments shape us via reward and punishment, classical conditioning. Behaviorism really is not a brand new idea. British empiricists, a group of philosophers long ago, not that long ago, basically argued that the way we act is simply nothing more than a building up of habits. And those habits begin to be built the first day we're born, and every day of our life as we have new experiences and nurture in the world. Those habits, some habits can get stronger, other habits can get weaker. And just as dogs and cats and lab rats have habits, so do you and me. So, to a behaviorist, when somebody says, what is personality in a human being? It's fundamentally um, your total set of habits in you that you carry with you wherever you go that shape the way you act in many different parts of the world, in a college classroom, at work, the way you drive a car, the way you interact with people in your life. That basically, to a behaviorist, you and I are nothing more than a interconnected set of habits. And we weren't born with these habits. These habits were built up via association, to use the term that the British empiricists use. They were built up as we move through life. So, whatever your habits are today, 10 years from now, will some of those habits that define you still be operative? Yes. But will there be other habits that might be stronger 10 years from now? And a third group of habits that might be weaker than they are in you right now, right? Might you build new habits that you don't currently have in your behavior? So notice that the talk in behaviorism is very different. We're not talking about the id, the ego, and the superego. We're not talking about Jung's collective unconscious and archetypes. Right? We're, um, we're looking at the idea that humans follow the same rules of learning that all other animals do. And in Skinner's theory of personality, as you're going to see, those rules come down to one of two sets. They're either behaviors that we learn through classical conditioning, or they are behaviors that we have learned through operant conditioning, and we'll dig into those. So notice the difference here. A lot of Skinner's theory is really based on scientific research. Way back in the beginning of the semester, one of the things that we talked about briefly was that some theories are more scientifically driven, and other theories of personality are more like philosophical statements. And of course, it's not either or, some are a mix of the two. Skinner basically argued that the only things we should be paying attention to in attempting to understand human behavior and human personality are ideas that can be scientifically observed, measured, and tested. He was a proponent of using science and the scientific method to understand this complicated thing called human personality. Jung's theory and Freud's theory, on the other hand, are much more grounded in a philosophical set of ideas about what makes people tick, about human behavior. Now, some of that was Freud put out ideas over 100 years ago, which at that point could not necessarily be scientifically tested to begin with. We have technology today that can explore how the human brain works, can explore that there's evidence that there are all kinds of multiple levels of processing, some what Freud would have called the unconscious. Um, but but basically, one of the things that Freud discussed toward the end of his life was the idea that someday in the future, some of his ideas that could not be scientifically validated back then would be able to be scientifically validated. Behaviorism, and especially Skinner's flavor of behaviorism, comes from a very different point of view. Basically, to Skinner, the only things that we can study scientifically in human behavior are things that are going on publicly on the outside. Right? Everything you know about me is based on your perception of my public behaviors. Right? You can't get inside my head. I can't directly get inside your head. So Skinner starts by dividing human behaviors into those that take place publicly and those that are private. Right? Now, most of the theories we've covered up to this point have a lot to say about the private mind of an individual. But you see, Skinner's going to turn that on its head. What Skinner's going to argue is the only things that count is what we can study scientifically. And the only things that we can study scientifically to build a theory of personality from are the ways that animals act, including us, in public. Now, that sounds like kind of an extreme idea, and in some ways it is. What he's really doing is he's not going to build a theory by trying to imagine what's going on privately in somebody's mind. He's only building it on what you and I do in public. But even though that's a kind of an extreme idea from one point of view, honestly, if you think about it, this is the world you and I live in. Let me give you a thought experiment. Think of somebody you know really, really well. You've spent a lot of time with that person. You've interacted with that person, or you've watched them interact with many different parts of the world out there, right? You know them, and you can probably make some pretty good predictions about what they're going to say or feel or act or do in different situations. But everything you know about them, you have not directly experienced in their private mind because you can't go there. Everything you know about their personality is based on your observations of them in this environment and that environment and the third environment and all the way down, right? So from one point of view, Skinner is kind of making sense. We can't directly experience each other's private mind, right? There's a wall, there's a barrier we can't get through. And in our day-to-day lives, even with people we know really well, we're basing our understanding of their personality by what they do in public, the behaviors, or Skinner calls them responses, that they make in public settings. If you've known somebody for 4 years as a coworker, you know some things about their personality, at least in a work environment, because that's where you've observed them. Could you meet them in a whole new part of the world, in a different environment? And might, in that environment, different habits in their behavior begin to show that were not obvious in a work environment? And could they have the same experience of you, right? So from Skinner's point of view, if you really want to know somebody's personality, you've got to have had an opportunity to observe their behaviors, not in one setting or two settings, but in multiple settings. We'll get into that a little bit more. So any theory of personality that's not based in scientific research, Skinner is going to exclude. He might say something like this: gee, that's interesting, but since we can't test it scientifically, it's just an idea. Without scientific validation, it means nothing. Was his point of view. So can you see why behaviorism was kind of a very different pushback against psychoanalysis? Psychoanalytic theory is mostly about what's going on privately. Here comes Skinner and others saying, wait a minute, it's a bunch of interesting ideas, but we can't observe it, we can't measure it, we can't test it. What good is it? He's trying something very different. He's trying to build a theory of personality that is grounded in science. Now, you know that one of the things that we've already covered is the pioneers in a new point of view are going to get some things right and get plenty of things wrong. And then other people are going to come along post and take the work that was done by that earlier person and validate it or invalidate it, add to it, expand it, and so on. And we have that same situation like we did with Freud and Jung. We have that again when it comes to Skinner and Bandura. After we're done with Skinner, the next one up is going to be Albert Bandura. And what Bandura did was he took Skinner's behavioral theory of personality and he expanded it. He argued that while Skinner was very, very right in a lot of different ways, that Skinner did not pay enough attention to a third type of learning that is extremely important in primates and extremely important in humans, and that is called social observational learning, which I think a lot of you have heard of, right? Social observational learning. So Bandura is going to take the work of Skinner and then build on that to include a third type of learning that you and I do, which is based on observation and imitation, or observation and modeling. We will get to that in a week and a half, or a week or so down the road. Okay. So let me just start, and again, just still prefacing Skinner a little bit here. There's a lot of criticisms that can be made of behavioral theories and of behaviorism in general. One of the criticisms has been in this focus to make the study of behavior scientific and based only on what we're doing in public. Are we throwing the baby out with the proverbial bathwater? By ignoring things going on privately in the mind, are we actually coming up with a theory that might be scientifically testable, but not particularly useful? And I'd like to ask you to hold that question in your mind as we work through the next couple of weeks with Skinner and then again with Bandura. I must say this, though. Behaviorism transformed in many different ways psychotherapy in Europe and in the United States. There are many, many specific methods that therapists use to work with specific sorts of human struggles that really are the result of the work that was done by people like Pavlov, Watson, Skinner, Bandura, and a number of others. And we'll talk about some of those others as well. You've all heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT emerged right out of behavioral theories of personality. DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, which is a treatment that is often, it's very useful when it's done properly, but for folks with borderline issues, for its modification has been used to work with people in recovery. There's a whole lot of techniques that modern day therapists use that really did not exist before the development of behavioral theories and cognitive behavioral theories. So it's a world. And I'm looking at the clock now. We're at 22 minutes now. Let me just make sure, one more look. I think I'm kind of setting the stage here. Right. Okay. So this is going to be a real short one. I'm going to stop here and then I'm going to get this review sheet to you. And sometime in the next 2 days or so, I'm going to give you Skinner Part 2. And there might even be a Skinner Part 3. How exciting is that for you? Okay, so I need to get you the Skinner review sheet and the Bandura review sheet. I'll be emailing them to you as an attachment. And I hope this, 20 minutes or so, though brief, has kind of set the stage. Remember what responsibility is on your plate, big time right now. Look up Skinner in the online textbook. Read it. Let me know if you have any questions about the midterm. All right. See you soon. Bye-bye.